Welcome, Michelle Glass here, and we are back in our second episode of Chapter 18, and our topic for this presentation are just those hormones, which, this is really like the star of the endocrine system, so we're going to be talking quite a lot about hormones, and we'll be getting very specific before too long. Okay, so hormones, remember, the thing that's special is that these are chemical messengers that are traveling throughout the body via the bloodstream. And so this is giving us a widespread communication across the body. And remember, these hormones then are able to talk to target cells. Target cells are going to be those cells that have receptors either on the cell membrane or inside the cell that these hormones are able to bind with. When we talk about hormones coordinating activities in the body or making changes in the body or talking to our cells, what kind of things are we actually regulating with hormones? So we have a whole list here. So hormones are able to alter the following things: growth and development of the cells. Remember, growth means just getting bigger. Development is talking about changes that are happening maybe from, if we think about the whole organism from infancy into toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, maturity, old age. So that is an example of development, and we see that happening with our cells too. So we've talked about cells that are transitional, and then we've talked about cells that are mature cells that are actually doing the job, and so we'll see that hormones can help coordinate that kind of development. Okay, as well as like the whole organismal development, right? Okay, reproduction is something that's coordinated by hormones. So we see the coordination of our gametes, which is our sex cells, our egg or sperm cells. We see the coordination of, the development of the embryo and the fetus. We see the development of the sex structures to be able to do reproduction. So we see all of that being coordinated by hormones. Cell metabolism and energy balance is also something that's regulated by hormones or altered by hormones. Remember, our term metabolism means all the chemical reactions that are happening in the cell. And then energy balance, that's talking about, breaking down sugars or fatty acids to make that ATP molecule. We'll see hormones involved in regulating fluid and electrolyte and nutrients in the body. In order to get those nutrients digested, you're going to see special hormones are released. And then in order to get those nutrients actually into your cells, we will see that hormones are going to coordinate that as well. Okay, oops. And then finally, we'll see that hormones can be involved in mobilizing our body defenses. So that would be things that we'll talk about when we get into that lymphatic system. How are hormones causing these changes to happen in our cells? What's their actual mechanism of action? We'll see that there are 3 different mechanisms of actions that hormones will take with our cells. So one of those is to alter gene activity. So you can actually see hormones involved in turning genes on and turning genes off. When you turn a gene on, what that means is you're basically going to allow for transcription and translation of that gene. So if you turn a gene on, that means you are going to be making a new protein that hasn't been made yet in that cell, or hasn't been made maybe for a while in that cell, right? So sometimes we'll see that our hormones can actually bind to receptors on our DNA molecule, and then that can trigger for gene expression to occur. You can also turn genes off, so you can then be essentially determining what kinds of proteins a cell is making by, talking directly to that DNA molecule, turning genes on and turning genes off, okay? And then, this then is altering that rate of protein synthesis in part, so you can have this direct connection of activating a gene in order to trigger transcription and translation. And then if you are, remembering your jobs of proteins, it's quite extensive, right? So proteins are those ion channels. So we can make changes just by putting different ion channels or different kinds of receptors on the cell membrane. That actually takes us to that third mechanism, which is looking at an alteration in the membrane permeability. So we can see like we can tell genes to make different receptors. We can increase the amount of those receptors that we're making, and we can stick them on our membrane. And now our cell is more sensitive to some kind of signaling mechanism. Your proteins also include your enzymes, remember, and enzymes are required basically for all of the chemical reactions that are happening in your cell. So you can control the metabolism of your cell by controlling what enzymes are available. So if enzyme A is available, then you're able to do chemical reaction A. If enzyme A is not there, then you can't do chemical reaction A, right? And so this all ties together with this idea of gene activity and protein synthesis. When we are looking at the molecules themselves, we'll see that there are 3 different categories of hormones. So we're going to have some groups of hormones that are amino acid derived. Remember, amino acids are those building blocks of our proteins. We have some that are peptide derived. So remember that your primary structure of your protein is a chain of amino acids linked together by peptide bonds. So a peptide is going to be a few amino acids that are linked together. And then we have our third category of hormones are described as lipid derived. These include your eicosanoids and your steroids, both of which were mentioned when you talked about lipids way back in your chapter 3. Now here is the significant feature of being a lipid-derived hormone. You can cross directly through that phospholipid bilayer of the cell. So what we often see is your lipid-derived hormones, the eicosanoids and the steroids, are crossing into the cell and then binding to a receptor that's located in the cytoplasm, a receptor that's located on the mitochondria, a receptor that's located on that nuclear envelope, or a receptor that's located directly in the DNA molecule. So these lipid-derived hormones are acting in a different way from those that are amino acid and peptide derived, meaning how they actually communicate with the cell. Now, once those hormones make it into the bloodstream, we did describe them as long-lasting, but they're not like permanent, right? So we do see that they are some way, somehow kind of removed from the bloodstream. So how is that happening? There's 3 ways. So, if your hormone's in the blood and it diffuses out of the blood to the target tissue, then it's basically removed from circulation. Also, we will see that both your kidney and your liver will be important in absorbing and breaking down some of those hormones. So this is limiting the longevity of those hormones. This is helping to remove them from the bloodstream, so they're not there forever. And then we also have enzymes present in our body fluid. So this is both in our bloodstream itself and also in our interstitial or extracellular fluid that will break down hormones. So those hormones are released into circulation, but they're not permanent. They're not there all the time, right? We see them leaving the bloodstream to bind or talk to our target cells. We see them being removed by both the liver and the kidneys. And we also see them being basically removed by enzymes that are present in the body fluids, bloodstream, as well as the interstitial fluid. And then the last little piece of information here is, we have talked already about G proteins and second messenger systems. And we'll see that kind of communication system occurs with our hormones as well. So we saw it in the autonomic nervous system. We talked about it again in our special senses. And we're going to see that here again with our hormones. So that's like a common theme that we see in the body. In the case of having a G protein and a second messenger system, the hormone itself is considered that first messenger. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about the hormone as the first messenger. Some of our hormones, especially if they're amino acid or peptide derived, are not able to actually enter the cell itself. So the first messenger there is binding to those receptors on the cell membrane and not entering the cell. And so we'll be looking at those mechanisms in our next video presentation. And that's it for now.